You are listening to UPRN, United Public Radio Network, coming to you live on 105.3 right up to 107.7 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans. UPRNtalkradio.com.
Looking for stories that are fresh and new? Dark fantasy, humor, space exploration, time travel, cyberpunk, alternate history, and more. They're in the L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future anthology from 24 award-winning authors and illustrators, plus art and writing tips and bonus stories. L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future. Buy your copy at galaxypress.com, Amazon, or wherever books are sold.
All right, everybody. It's time for you to get out and nominate your favorite podcasts. There's an amazing show I want you to consider for the People's Choice Podcast Awards. The Outer Realm in the category of Best Female Hosted Podcast. The Outer Realm is a very popular show hosted by Michelle DeRoche and Amelia Pisano, which boasts millions of listeners each week who are well known for and have been complimented on their very laid-back, roundtable style of interviewing. Together, this dynamic duo brings you the best of the best with guests from around the world who are well-versed within their respective fields of ufology, paranormal, esoteric, and other areas of high strangeness, and more. So go to podcastawards.com to nominate The Outer Realm in the category Best Female Hosted Podcast. That's podcastawards.com, and please take a moment and do it now.
All right, everybody, it's time for you to get out and nominate your favorite podcast. Yes, it is that time of year again. There's a show I want you to consider for the People's Choice Podcast Awards, UFO Undercover, in the category of entertainment. UFO Undercover brings you some of the most revealing and current research that is being done with respect to alien abductions and contact. Host Joe Montaldo has been an abduction researcher for over 35 years and is uniquely qualified to bring you live interviews with some of the most well-known researchers in ufology. Go to podcastawards.com to nominate UFO Undercover in the category of entertainment. That's podcastawards.com, and please take a moment and get out and vote now.
Hey there. It's time for you to get out and nominate your favorite podcasts. There's an amazing show I want you to consider for the People's Choice Podcast Awards. The News on the Flip Side, in the category of politics and news. News on the Flip Side is a much different news and political program which is not deemed as opinion news. Listen as Joe Montaldo brings to you just the facts from trusted sources which will allow you, the people, to make up your own minds on the various stories being reported on. Go to podcastawards.com to nominate News on the Flip Side in the category of politics and news. That's podcastawards.com, and please take a moment and do it now.
It's time for you to get out and nominate your favorite podcasts. There's an amazing show I want you to consider for the People's Choice Podcast Awards, Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast, in 3 categories: education, storyteller drama, and art. For 4 years, the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast has provided advice and tips from international best-selling authors, world-class artists, contest judges and winners, and industry professionals based on the world-famous Writers of the Future contest created in 1983 by L. Ron Hubbard to help the aspiring writer and artist no matter their age. It is dedicated to the future of storytelling and art by showing that it is never too late to start, and those who make it are those who never give up. Go to podcastawards.com to nominate the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast in any or all of the 3 categories: education, storyteller drama, and art. That's podcastawards.com, and please take a moment and go out and vote now.
Hello, and welcome to the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast. This is John Goodwin, your host. This podcast is dedicated to the aspiring writer and artist and will provide inspiration and tips from top professionals in the field. If you've been listening to this podcast or are new to it, I thank you very much. I would also appreciate if you took a moment to follow it on whatever platform you use to listen to your podcasts. I also have to let you know that our latest volume of L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future is now available in bookstores throughout the U.S., Canada, the UK, South Africa, and Australia, as well as through all major online retailers. It contains the 12 winning authors and 12 winning illustrators selected by some of your favorite names in science fiction and fantasy. You've heard me talking about it for almost 4 years on this podcast, and so you should know by now what I'm talking about. This week, I'm doing several interviews at the Writers and Illustrators of the Future Volume 39 Workshop Week and Awards event, and I'm very excited to have a very special friend. She's an editor. I was introduced to her via Mike Resnick several years ago. Lezli Robyn has been a guest on the show, I guess about 2 years ago. Like I said, she's an editor. She's the editor of Galaxy's Edge magazine and assistant publisher at ARC Manor. She's a published author, Australian author, which you will rapidly find out as soon as she begins speaking. So, welcome back, Lezli.
Hello. Welcome, everyone.
So, we've done this before, but I guess yours is a great story of how you've always had a strong affinity for writing and for reading, but how you actually made it into the science fiction community, and just that journey is, I think, is very, very special. And it's also very special to the person that made that possible, which is ultimately what we try to do with Writers and Illustrators of the Future, as per the original, legacy that's created by L. Ron Hubbard. So please enlighten me.
So my career started in an unorthodox way, and a lot of authors will find there's no blueprint to getting their career started. There's no cheat guide. There is examples out there, and there's also lists of, if you do X, Y, Z, you should start your career. But a lot of the major authors that you even know had a very unorthodox start to their career. So I met one of the previous judges on Writers of the Future, Mike Resnick, on eBay. I was buying a book, Anne McCaffrey book. I wanted a signed limited edition book of hers, and he happened to be selling it. Now, of course, if anyone's brought off eBay, you don't know the sellers. They're not under their own name. It's like a little business name. And so I had no idea he was this award-winning author. I just wanted this book. And originally I missed the original, like the ending bid time. And I just missed it by a minute, like my computer froze, whatever it was. I missed it. I didn't get the book, but no one else did either. So I thought, he probably relist it next week. He never relisted it. And I found out he cycles the books. If they don't sell 1 week, he just waits a few months. So I contacted him directly and said, I would love this book. I see you haven't relisted it. I promise you, if you relist it, I will buy it. I just did the stupid thing and missed the first bid time. And so he said, how about I sell it to you directly then? We can avoid eBay fees. And so I said, that's brilliant. The book arrived, and not only was it like packed beautifully, I found out his wife, Carol, used to do all the packing. But in it, which he didn't quite realize she did, she put flyers in for his works. So I was like, oh, Mike Resnick. Oh, that's interesting. Like books by Mike Resnick. Okay. And didn't think much of it, but I sent an email to the seller saying, I really appreciate that you were selling a rare book for a really good price. Like it was not expensive at all. So he replied back and he said, I'm an author too, and I don't see my autograph being worth extra. Like I don't see why that should cost people extra. I'm willing to sign books for anyone. And I find it difficult to price books higher with signatures in them simply because the author signed them, because it's just alien to my nature. And he said, well, I met Anne McCaffrey back in 1963 when she made me sign up for Science Fiction Writers Association, of America at the time. And so we started talking about my favorite author, one of my favorite authors, Anne McCaffrey. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm getting like an inside window. And in one of the emails, I've flippantly, a bit cheekily said, oh, I haven't read any of your titles though. Forgetting, of course, he has my address. He's already sent me books. So he sent me, he's like, And the exact line was in the email, well, we can't have that then. And he sent me his titles. He started with 2 books. And me being completely new and not at all knowing this is not to be done, I critiqued them, which as all authors sort of kind of groan and go, oh my gosh. So because on my side, I was like, I don't want to just say, oh my gosh, that was a great book, thanks. Because he might just assume I was saying that and not actually read it. I wanted to prove that I was reading it. So I was talking about the ins and outs of the book. And his response wasn't really with words. It was more books. I kept having books come into my house. And I live in Australia, so you've got to understand, he was shipping these things from the US to Australia just randomly. And so I was like, this is becoming like a full-time job, critiquing his books. But I did a few more. And after a few months, he sent me a message and he said, I know I haven't said much because I've just been fascinated by your responses. We would talk a lot about other stuff, but he hadn't been saying much about what I was doing, my critiques of his books.
Right.
And I think because he wasn't trying to he was wanting to see what I was doing organically. And he said to me, you're spotting things my editors never spotted. I think you have like a really good eye for this. Have you considered writing? And I said, well, of course I have. I actually sent Anne McCaffrey an email when I was 16 years old. And she responded, by the way, that she was that kind of woman, and said, how do you, the naive, how do you start in publishing? And so, of course, I want to be a writer, but I do not want you to think that I'm talking to you as like a way to sort of get a career out of. Yeah, it was, the friendship was what was important, the friendship that was developing. And I was quite stubborn. He says he's never met someone who's quite so stubborn. I would say no all the time. So he tried another tactic. He said, how about you come to the WorldCon, writers, it's a science fiction and fantasy convention that's traditionally held every year. I think the first one was in the 1920s. And he said, how about you then just meet all your favorite authors? Like, I can introduce you to them because, they're like all my buddies. How about you just do that, because you're a fan first, which he was always a fan first. And I said, sure. That would be great. Like, where is it? And it was Denvention in Denver, and it was in 2018. So I turn up, again, all innocent, naive me, thinking this is like the whole purpose of this convention is I can meet all my favorite authors. And what he'd done, which is one of the sweetest and still mind-boggling things for me, is he'd gone to all his author friends, all these big names, Rob Sawyer, Kevin Anderson, Larry Niven, you name it, everyone. Nancy Kress, a lot of the judges that are here now and who are my friends. And he said, I really want this girl to start writing, but I've got to try and find another way to do it. But let's just show her what this field can do. So he got them all to bring a book, a signed book for me. I had 40 signed books I had to ship back. But the funny thing is they were turning up everywhere. Like, I had some left at my hotel. So like, it's like a package for you at the desk. Like, I'd never had such an avalanche of like writer love than in that moment. Now, one of the things that I did, I was innocently thinking, when is this ever going to happen to me again, going to a writer convention? I've got to make the most of it. My twin sister is also an avid science fiction and fantasy fan. Her favorite author, Lee Modesitt, was there. And she actually gifted me some of his books on my 16th birthday. That's how much she loved him. Wow. When your twin gives you books, it's love. And he was there doing an autographing as well as other things. But I went and brought some of his books to get signed as our birthday present, or a birthday present to her. And because WorldCons often fall on our birthday. And I waited for him, and he actually had been seeing me go around with Mike Resnick and like being introduced to people. And he'd been seeing that sort of like in the periphery of while he was doing his things. And he said to me, oh yeah, sure, I'll sign books for your sister. Would she also like some promotional items? And he was just super sweet about it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be like the best sister. My sister's going to love me. But then while he was doing this, he said, oh, let's grab a coffee and I'll sign all these things. And again, I'm thinking, deer in headlights, this is not real life, right? And he said, okay, I have to ask. I've been seeing you go around with Mike Resnick. I saw that you went to the Hugo Awards. I was one of the guests, plus ones, I should say, not one of the guests. What's the deal? Like, what's happening? And I said, I know he wants me to write, but I'm resistant because I don't want him to ever think that this unique and remarkable friendship is because I'm trying to get a career, you know? And he's the one that told me that Mike Resnick has writer children, that he's known for spotting talent or people he sees with potential and actually loves and thrives on helping them start their career. And so my twin sister's favorite author is the one that basically said, you should go for it. You're not taking advantage. If anything, you're making him sad because you're not taking him up on his very genuine offer. And so because of Lee Modisett and Mike Resnick and Anne McCaffrey, whose book I bought, that's how I started my career. And through writing with Mike Resnick, I first started writing with him because he wanted to see how I could do. We did collaborations, the most collaborations he did with someone, because we just kept doing more because we got along so well. And then I started my solo career of, my solo pieces. And then during that journey, what he first saw in me at the start, where he said, I'm spotting things that the other editors don't notice, I then also became an editor. So that's why I have the multiple hats that I do. So, yeah.
That's a great story. Because Mike was calling me, said, Galaxy's Edge is available. Your Galaxy Press, why don't you buy it and get started up again? He was trying to get me to buy it and start it up. He said, I do my not just keeping up with the Rise of Future.
Yeah.
Right. I just can't do it. So then he worked out, and that's when Shahad, he got with him, and then he bought it and got started. And Mike was the he was the finance, and Mike was the direction and the face of it, and an amazing face he had on that to provide that direction and resurrecting a very famous magazine.
Yeah, it's one of the hardest things. I took over editing Galaxy's Edge magazine after Mike passed away. And the hardest, it was also moving, but one of the hardest things was changing, because under Galaxy's Edge, it said edited by Mike Resnick. And I had to change it to created by Mike Resnick. And it was just that, it was bittersweet because it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, it's honoring him. But it meant that we lost him, obviously, to make that change. And we've had a lot of feedback that it moved people that we kept honoring him that way, after he passed. Also, if you haven't come across Mike Resnick's work in the past, look him up. He was insanely prolific. And every issue since his passing, we published a short piece of fiction of his in the issue. So he was still in every issue. Like, he might not have been editing it, but his words were still in every issue since he passed. And I think I know a lot of the fans of him that started buying the magazine because of him. Obviously, because they also loved the fiction and that, but there was an element of the people that brought it that loved that they had like a tangible connection to him still sort of running through the magazine.
Yeah, if anybody's interested, when he passed, I created a video in memoriam for Mike, which has a bunch of pictures from when he was a little kid all the way up to, his senior years. And they'll really give you a lot of the music that's in there. That's his favorite music. So the whole thing we tried, it's a total, dedication to an amazing life well lived.
And right when that happened, right when he passed, is right when the pandemic started. So originally I was going to be coming as one of the guest speakers to Writers of the Future, and going to be, like you had told me about the memorial and that beautiful video. And so it was going to be one of the events that I knew I'd probably bawl all the way through, but it felt like such a good thing that you did that. Now, the great thing about the video and that is you could still obviously play it, everyone could see it and all of this, but it was so bittersweet that, I couldn't go to the event and see it at the event. And in a way, I do feel relief that Mike didn't see the pandemic world, because at the start, how scary it was for everyone, that he did miss that because of the timing of his passing. But it was only within a month that it got declared. So yeah, his end days were filled with a lot of love from the science fiction and fantasy field, because I created a fundraiser for him and his widow. And so the outpouring of love from the field was one of the last things that he obviously witnessed before he passed away. So.
Yeah, and then last month I was on the phone with him talking about more projects that could be done, and it was just
he never ever would say he was terminal, even though his family knew, and it's not like he didn't know, but he was that type of person. No, I've still got time. I'm still living. I'm not dying. And that was very sort of important to note about him, that he never told anyone, I'm dying. No.
Yeah. No, he was just, and I was just, for myself, talking to him, just, I'll run with his lead on that one there.
Yes, exactly.
It's the same thing with Dave Farland when I was on the phone with him 2 days before he passed about, the next year of Rise to Future, and he was going to be doing an online Zoom event for all the different people, and we were talking. He said, "Can we push it back? I'm not going to be quite ready for it yet, so let's push it back a few weeks, and then I'll do it." Just like totally creating that stuff there. I called him at one point, and he picked the phone and says, "Hello, John." I said, "Hey, Dave, where are you?" I said, "I'm in ICU." I said, "What?" Yeah, I said, well, "I saw a call from John Goodman. I had to take it." And I said, "Aww. Dave, I want you to get better,
Yeah, right.
But that's what, for them, it was just the whole thing with Riders to Future was so important to them, to Dave, Eric Flint, Mike that we're talking about right now. It's just, it was such an important part of their life, putting that future of the genre there, which is what the, Mr. Hubbard's contest is dedicated to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So getting back onto what I wanted to be able to discuss is, as an editor, it's a very, we have a lot of writers here, but as an editor, I'm going to pick it apart, spend the next, we're already a third of the way through this.
It's amazing.
But what works, what doesn't work, because you select obviously for Galaxy's Edge, which is what I'm mostly interested in talking about here. You got a romance magazine.
Yeah.
And you've got.
No, we'll do the short stories that sort of in partnership with Writers of the Future in a way.
Yeah. So what works, what doesn't work, the whole subject of writing for a magazine, writing for a market, how important that is.
Yes.
It might be a great story, but if it's not for that market, in this case, Galaxy's Edge, it's not going to go anywhere because it's just not your market. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. I've actually had, so this is one of the interesting things to start off. Mike Resnick and I had something very similar. And so when he was editing the magazine, it's one thing that carried through to me. He used to write two modes. He used to write award quality mode and the humor, like a laugh a minute, sort of very conversational, enjoyable, but not the type of story that would win awards. And both of those were in the magazine. He would be able to see, and he had this uncanny ability to look at a story and go, this one will be nominated for awards. It didn't have to be his own, anyone's. He knew what was, and he would even say, okay, I'm writing a story this quality for this market because I know that in this market I could go up for awards, or he was strategic about it. Now, when it comes to magazines, he also knew that you had to pepper in both types of stories because, readers can get fatigue if they're always reading just the heart-wrenching, tug your heart out of your body stories. Well, then you get another one. You're like, this is like, I am so drained. So you had to be able to balance the stories. But saying that, there is a somewhat theme that anthologies have. We were very science fiction and fantasy, not really horror. So straight away, authors got to know that don't send us that really creepy horror with a touch of fantasy story. We're not dark fantasy. That's just not our vibe. So part of it is the editors do kind of put an element of it out there, like they do let people know this is the type of stories we want. And it is important that authors read the submission guidelines, because they sometimes do have the do and don'ts about genres and about we've seen too many zombie stories or we've seen too many of this type of story. So that is important in tailoring to the market you submit to.
Right.
It doesn't mean you have to tailor your writing. It just means that the story you write might not be for that market, but it can be for the other 10 markets or just 3 of the others. And I think that's important. But when you're submitting to multiple markets, say you've got 3 rejections from one, to another story got 2 rejections, and you're thinking, but I thought it was a good story. I think it's important that people realize the story might have been sound and 100% wonderful, but it was not right for that market. And as John was saying, that's a big vital part of getting published, is having the right story at the right time, read by the editor with the right level of quality that the editor's willing to take a chance on you, because you become part of the image of the magazine.
Right.
It's not just that we're publishing you and you become, oh, you're some of the words. You're actually creating part of what the magazine feels to readers, and you become part of, in a way, how the magazine appears and feels, as you know. And when I became editor, I knew that I'm known, I love bittersweet stories. So that doesn't mean depressing stories, but it can have that ending that doesn't always have everything tied up in like in a nice little bow, but it'll have a consequence type of ending that makes you go, oh, wow, or oh, no, or, just have that impact is like, and it's usually a character arc impact, not so much like, and the world blew up. It's not a thing impact. It's more something that impacted the character. So while I obviously, like, for the writers of the future authors yesterday, I gave them that little tip because we're doing some anthologies coming forward. So now they know that. They've got a little bit of a heads up. But you can actually do your research online, because a lot of people will discuss this sort of thing or talk about it. And you get to know, it's very good for you to get to know the markets as well as before you submit. And so you get to learn about the editors and stuff. It's, in a way, it's I'm not obviously saying stalk the editors, because that's never a good thing.
Right.
But on social medias and that, you follow the magazines, you follow the editors, because often they have a public profile, and you'll get and it's important to read the works that they've published. One, because you don't want to have the exact clone of that story. I can get submitted 2 wonderful stories, but one's an exact clone of one that I published a few months ago. It might have their own flair, but since I've published one of that exact type before, I can't publish another one. It'll look like I'm not paying attention as an editor.
What's the lead time between submission and consideration?
So for us, we have a turnaround of 4 months and then a short list of 1 month after that. And so within 4 months, people would get a response. They would know if it's a straight no or if they're shortlisted. And then it would be 1 month after that. Usually, typically following that, because again, it's a magazine format.
Right.
Often people are published within the 6 months to 1 year time. So what ends up happening is some of the stories, like with authors or readers, some stories really stick with an editor. So I might have one that I just bought, but I know is perfect for like the magazine issue coming out around Christmas, because it's not a Christmas story, right? But it has that sense of wonder, like that festive feel is how I would put it. And so that I will move it up to put it in, or I'd move it to the next year. It would be held a little longer, because I know that the issue coming out then would have that it's the season type feeling, and people would curl up with like a hot drink and a blanket, and it's a good winter story, that type of thing. So there's a lot of that consideration when it comes into when you piece in the issues together too. And you find well, at least I find,
Yeah.
there's an unconscious theme that gets created often throughout the issues. So completely different stories, sci-fi or fantasy, but you might have a theme of people, like starting again after a loss or something. And I'll notice a few of the main stories will have that theme just in a different way. And
Mhm.
so that also creates a feel for the magazine.
Good. Now, one thing, and I've had this as a repeating
hmm
point in multiple podcast interviews, a reject from a magazine, what can that mean?
So there's several, and that's why it's good if unfortunately, editors can't always give a personalized rejection.
Right.
There's what's called form rejection, and there's a personalized rejection. I tried to give as many personalized as I could, and I would sort of put in, even if it's not one that I read, but I saw the first reader's little information about why they stopped reading the story or what have you, I would give a little bit of insight. So it has to be constructive criticism. And there is such a thing of responding with, this was actually a wonderful story, but we're not the right market. So that's one of the answers.
Mhm.
It didn't find its literal right home. It doesn't belong there.
Right.
Another answer is, we've seen some of this before. So again, wonderful story, but I just published another Angel
Exactly.
story.
Yeah.
The third thing is always, which is always the case, is there has to be a level. Editors are actually willing to work on a story and actually help an author bring it up to standard if it has a remarkable idea or a remarkable character. If it speaks to the editor in some way, the structural thing can be fixed, or the plot hole. An editor can actually take the time to do that if it really impacts them and hits them.
Right.
Unfortunately, what it tells you, if there's a form rejection, usually, is it didn't have that little magic moment to impact enough to be worth spending time on at that particular time by the editor. Now, I'm just going to put a little note on this that unfortunately with magazines, you have to respond quick. You only read a few paragraphs. So for an editor to take the time to work on a story with an author, that means that something in the story kept them reading to the end, even if it wasn't perfect. A lot of stories are rejected before the first page is finished. And unfortunately, the biggest thing is you have to nail that first page, get the hook in as an author
Mhm.
to get past that first hurdle, because the rejection time with magazines is a lot quicker. We can't spend the time to consider them more.
Good. That makes sense on that, because it's people will like incorrectly assume that the story was bad.
Right.
It has nothing to do with
Nope.
it. It's a perfectly good story. It's just those reasons
Yep.
you gave.
Yeah. And a big thing as well is you might have, say, 90% of the story was amazing, but guess what? Your first opening paragraphs were not. Some authors get into their stride when they're writing, is how I put it. So, the first few steps are a little unsteady, but then they really get into it. They're going to have more of a problem selling to a magazine, because we only read the first few paragraphs to decide if it's worth seeing the rest of
Pursuing,
the
yeah.
stride. And that can be a big thing. So it can be an amazing story that we never read because the first few paragraphs didn't
hook you.
Didn't hook us. Yes.
Good. All right. So listen, people, it has nothing to do with automatically, pulling out your whip and starting, over your left or
Right.
right shoulder, whacking away. Yeah.
There's a way it gets put. A lot of the time, editors will say, don't start like with information about the world backstory. Start in the middle of the scene. So again, it doesn't mean you have to have guns out and blazing, but you start in the middle of the action. So it feels like when you're starting to read that you're actually falling into the story immediately.
Right.
And that's the hook element. Whether it's a character discovering something or hearing something or having some kind of trigger moment
Yeah.
where it propels them into the plot of the story, You want to feel like you're falling with them into the story. And so that's important. There's one thing that I didn't mention yesterday in the workshop, just because of time constraints, but there's such a thing as earning your exposition. So established authors, because we know they've got a big reputation, they've put out amazing works and things like that, they can get away with starting a story with a little bit of exposition, which is like description and all of this. And because we know from their reputation, they've got the goods to back it up.
Right.
When you read on, you'll get into the good juicy bits, you know.
Right.
Now with new authors, you have to earn your exposition. If you're starting off with like a description on something, editors are yawn and like, no, because we don't know what you've got. All we're seeing is you're just describing something. We're not, it's a thing of show, not tell. And so you need to be showing from your first page. You need to show what's happening, not tell what's happening. And that's a big thing especially in the short market, in that first page. And so unfortunately, a more established author can get away with having a slightly less quality story if because they've got the reputation and that behind them and the promise that they'll deliver.
Yeah.
And new authors don't have that. You have to sell it in the first page.
Right. Sometimes I've seen Jody, the coordinating judge for Writers of the Future, she'll go through and, okay, so being page 3 or 4, it's okay, good. This is where your story begins. Because
I've done this.
Yeah.
Exactly right. No.
You know, so because you have to be there where something's going to grab them. So that's in the middle of the action. You can go back and fill it in more later, but you've got to get the person and hook them because you're talking short fiction. We're not talking novels. This is short fiction.
Short fiction.
Okay. Now, what about the value of short fiction to getting discovered or making your break as an author? Is that still a good thing?
It actually is still a good thing. It's interesting because short fiction had, in a way, more of I suppose, a name to it. When in the earlier years, short fiction was like seen as, it's quite a big thing. But now novels have taken over in the level, this is prestigious to have the big novel contract or whatever.
Right.
However, there's actually more short fiction markets now than there was before the digital age. Now, that saturation is not always good when it's not a good market, obviously.
Right.
But in general, there's a lot of quality markets, and a lot of the original markets have converted over. So they also have the digital platforms and that. So, the Asimovs, the analogs, they've come along with the ride. And so one of the things with short fiction, when it comes to getting your name out there and discoverability, I've actually I mentored an author last week. He's had 4 novels that he's been put in to agents, trying to get an agent first so he can then submit to publishers. And he has what I call writer fatigue. He's exhausted waiting.
Right.
Waiting can be exhausting. Like, he's done the work.
Right.
Now he's waiting. And he says, I just feel like I'm not getting anywhere. Part of the problem was he's not discoverable. The other part is he's not networking in the field. He doesn't feel like he has buddies. Because he doesn't know anyone. So I told him networking is important. Get to know other authors, editors, social media and that. And that's the first step of he won't feel as alone. But I advised him, and this is the point of the answer, is I said, try your hand at short fiction. If anything, it'll just hone your skills because you have to be able to tell a story in a lot shorter word spans, but it still has to have everything a story needs: the beginning, the middle, the end, the character arc, a resolution or a consequence. You just have to do it at a more condensed rate. The thing with short stories and how they're important to careers is if while you're waiting for the novel sale, even if that's what your aim is, I want to be a novel writer, you can actually be in the notice of the editors, of novelists, of novels. You can actually get the notice and everything earlier if you start in short fiction. So not only do you hone your skills, but you have pieces of fiction you can submit regularly elsewhere because they're short. You can even take a break for your novel, write a short story when you're having fatigue with your novel, submit it out there. And when you start getting noticed or published, believe me, the editors of the novels, because they love science fiction and fantasy, they read the short stuff too. And I've known multiple authors that started in short fiction that became friends and noticed by editors of publishing companies that do novels, and they get noticed beforehand. And it means that when they're submitting their novel, if that editor sees it on their desk, they're like, oh my God, I loved that novelette that they sold to Asimov's. Like, oh, I wonder if they're novels. Like, great. Also, I do think short fiction helps in career credibility when you're going for an agent. If you can say, I've won a Writers of the Future award at the very start of your career, or got multiple silver mentions and so forth, and you've got that in your cover letter to either an agent or an editor, it gives you credentials from the start that you can help build in your career. So yeah, I think it's quite important.
That's good. Now, with short fiction, I've seen some people, I've got a novel, if I just take out a chapter, because Pat Rothfuss did this with his book, but you can't just take a chapter and tack on a beginning and end and say, here's a short story. There's a lot of problems with that. Let's talk about adverbs.
Oh my gosh, adverbs. So even I have to go through my own work and search for some you can search, find, and kill.
Right.
But there is such a thing as trimming or expanding manuscripts. It usually works the other way around. So not from having a long piece and then trying to excise basically like the heart of the piece and oh, this is like a short story encapsulated. This is the bit that's so important. Everyone will love reading this and go, wow. It usually works the other way around, actually, where a short fiction, usually a novella, gets expanded into a novel. And most of the time, the novella still is better than the novel because the novella was the length that story needed
to be.
Right. And then the novel was like adding in a little bit of adverbing and expanding word usage. So one of the things that I have found when I do is when I get novelettes, I love a good novelette. I write also to a good novelette length, but I find sometimes novelettes are padding of short stories. And believe it or not, search, find, kill adverbs, things like that, you do trim up a story, and then it means that the story is the length it should have been. So yes, you can excise something out of a novel.
It was such a super exciting adventure that they went on. That was like when